Now, Jean-Martin Bauer is from the World Food Programme, and he joins us now to break down why this is such a challenge for the continent and beyond. Jean-Martin, thanks very much for your time. So we've seen that there's been a rise in global prosperity over the last couple of decades, but that's also been accompanied by a rise in food insecurity. One would think that it would be the opposite. Why is this happening?
Thanks, Georgia. This is happening for a variety of reasons. Number one is conflict. We have about 135 million people who were food insecure, acutely food insecure before the COVID pandemic. That's now risen to 343 million, quite an increase in just a few years. Number one reason is conflict, but also climate has a role to play as it had in Somalia. We need to know that with this increase in food insecurity globally, we also have an increase in the most severe category of food insecurity. We analysts classify food insecurity through the integrated food security phase classification. That's a 5-point scale. Phase 1 is normal, phase 2 is stress, 3 is crisis, 4 emergency, 5 is catastrophe. About 5 years ago, we had about 100,000 people who were in the most severe category, the catastrophe. Now, we ended the year 2024 with 1.9 million. That's because of the conflict in Gaza and in Sudan. So hunger's gotten, it's affecting more people, it's become more severe, and it's also happening at a time of reduced resources for the international community. And the funding gap to meet these higher needs hasn't been greater in a very long time.
And you've been working in the sector for 25 years. And I know, at least throughout my lifetime, we've seen these cycles of at least some of these famine crises hitting the headlines. What do you think needs to change? Or have you seen enough change in the way these crises are tackled?
Well, you mentioned the recurrent droughts that Somalia has gone through. Last year, there were 2 rainy seasons in Somalia. Both were well below average, resulting in poor harvests in the south, which is why there's been this alert. Our forecasting shows that the next harvest is itself at risk because there will likely not be enough rain once again. So this is something that happens, unfortunately, again and again in some countries. We've had that case in the Horn of Africa. You mentioned the Sahel. And what we need to do to address this is to prevent and act early. Late response is the problem. So we need to be able to deploy resources well in advance of a crisis developing when we have the forecast or the information that the situation might get worse. That's because 1 ounce of prevention is always worth a pound of cure. And in the humanitarian space, we know that $1 spent in advance in prevention avoids $7 worth of damages. So it's really important to work with anticipatory approaches.
Jean-Martin, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but what you've just said here has triggered a question in that you're talking about prevention and anticipatory responses. Do the communities who are actually on the receiving end of this, do they play a role?
Absolutely. The other thing that needs to change, and that's something we've already been working on at the World Food Programme, is involving communities to supply the food for the programs in the country. I talked about Somalia over there. The World Food Programme is working with local farmers to supply the food for the school feeding program. We need to work with local farmers, local businesses. We need to work with cash transfers and the local traders. We need to put cash in the money of the population so that they can go buy the foods that they need on the market, creating economic multipliers and jobs and reviving local economies. These are the things that need to change so that we can build more resilient food economies all over the world.
Thank you so much, Jean-Martin Bauer, for breaking that all down for us. Jean-Martin Bauer there from the World Food Programme, talking us through just some of the factors that could perhaps make a longer-term difference in tackling cyclical bouts of food insecurity in parts of the world.